Okay, well, as you know, members, we've got quite a large agenda this morning, and we're first going to deal with the delayed annual general meeting. So I've had apologies from Gareth Roberts, Beverly Parry-Jones and Nigel Smith, and I'm aware that Rondo Roberts is going to have to leave us partway through the meeting to attend the funeral. Are there any other apologies?
Councillor Richard Griffiths from Ynysmon has a hospital appointment and sends his apologies.
Thank you, Dylan.
I'll have to leave about 12 o'clock. I have an appointment.
Okay, no others. Item 2 is confirmation of the North Wales Fire and Rescue Authority office holders. Are you going to deal with this item, Colin?
If I may, Chair, Borodar, good morning, everybody. Good to see you all. Hope everybody is well. Chair, if I could, just a reminder of conventions for the meeting. I'm sure you're all very familiar with these. If everybody could please go on mute, if not speaking. If you struggle with your transmission, taking your video off might improve it, so at least you're audible. Please don't use the chat bar other than for essential purposes like indicating to speak, but we would prefer that you use the hands signal so the chair and the officers can spot you and bring you in. And generally, just to check with the chair, many of us have a convention for voting that we assume consent unless somebody puts in the sidebar they wish to vote against or abstain. It's impossible to vote and see everybody clearly on screen. That doesn't normally work with such a large meeting. So just to check with you, Peter, as chair, you're okay with that convention?
I am, Colin, yes.
So just to repeat that, if you're content with the recommendation, you need do nothing. If you wish to speak against or vote against or abstain, please put against or abstain in the chat bar, if that's okay. So on to the confirmation of the office holders. Thank you to all the members who replied. The vast majority of the full membership did reply to the email Alwyn and I sent out, which was to give you the two options to receive nominations and have a vote for today for office holders, or option 2 was to continue with the office holders for the remainder of the current year, noting that we are delayed. The second option is a convention that a number of us have applied in our local authorities, given the just really unusual circumstances we're working in. And thank you all the members who responded, opted for option 2, which means all the office holders continue in their roles until we reach the AGM, hopefully at the normal time next year. So that does mean congratulations to Peter as chair. He is back in the chair seat for this meeting and for the remainder of this municipal year. So congratulations, Peter, and thank you all for such a pragmatic and supportive way of handling such a difficult situation.
Well, can I thank on behalf of my other office holders, thank members for the confidence that they've shown in us today. And I have to say personally, I think in the present circumstances, it was the appropriate option to take. So thank you. Now move on to, I haven't been advised of any notice of urgent matters for the annual general meeting. Move on to item 4, the minutes of the annual meeting held on the 17th of June 2019, and they've been circulated to you. Could I have somebody who's willing to propose them as a true record, please?
I'll move them, Chair.
Thank you. And I noticed Brian Apsley's put his hand up. So I guess that perhaps we should check that the voting system is working in case we need it later on. So can I just ask members if they would actually agree whether they're in favour or not?
So just a reminder, members, you only need to put in the sidebar, the chat bar, if you abstain or vote against. Silence is taken as consent.
Okay, well, we have a majority anyway to that. Any matters arising? I can't imagine there are any. No. Now move on to item 6 there. You've been given a list of meeting dates for 2021, 21-22. Is there any comment you wish to make, Colin, on these?
Thank you, Chair. It's the normal meeting pattern and spacing out of meetings in the diary, so everybody should be familiar. If you could just endorse them, please. I think we have to be realistic, Chair. It's going to be probably some months before we're meeting physically again. None of us as authorities have been able to set physical meeting dates with any confidence for all the obvious reasons. So I think we assume that we'll be meeting like this well into the new year. My private advice would be at this stage, I think assume we'll be meeting like this until next summer at the earliest, recognising the restrictions, the unpredictability of the winter, and the fact we may have members and officers who might consider themselves to be vulnerable, who would be uncomfortable being in physical rooms for the moment. So I just wanted to put that little note of caution in, but the dates are set out for noting and approval. Thank you.
Thank you. I have some raised hands. I'm not quite sure whether they were in relation to approving the minutes or whether they have a question to raise in terms of the meeting date. So I've got Paul Shotton, Brian Apsley and Ann Davis. So if you haven't got a query in terms of the meeting dates, if you uninvite your hand, please.
Yeah, move the recommendations, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Right, we note those dates. Thank you very much. I've got another under item 7. So I therefore will conclude the annual general meeting. I will now move on to the main business meeting. And as members will be Assistant Chief Fire Officer Kevin Roberts is retiring from the service in January next year. And as this is Kevin's last meeting, I'd like to take this opportunity to say a few words in tribute to his work for the service and the authority. Kevin joined as a retained firefighter with Clwyd Fire Service in 1989. He then left the fire service a year later and served in the British Army for 4 years, serving in the UK, Germany and Cyprus, rejoining the fire service in 1994 as a whole-time firefighter. He was promoted to leading firefighter in 1998, becoming sub-officer of fire safety in 2000. In 2001, Kevin gained promotion as station officer with Kent Fire Brigade and transferred back to North Wales Fire and Rescue Service in 2003 as station commander at Bangor. Kevin became county safety manager for Flintshire in 2006 and head of training and development in 2011. In November 2013, Kevin was appointed to the role of area manager and thereafter became Assistant Chief Fire Officer in 2018. Kevin's knowledge is second to none, and he has been very committed to the work of the Fire and Rescue Service throughout the years. More recently, he has been heavily involved in the work around Grenville, ensuring North Wales Fire and Rescue Service is prepared to protect the communities of North Wales living in high-rise buildings. He's also been chair of the project, which is developing the Staywise project across Wales, which will provide online education as part of the national curriculum to all young people in schools across Wales. His commitment to young people has been further demonstrated by his work across Wales in the safeguarding field. He has led on the service's Armed Forces Covenant signed earlier this year, and his military background meant he has been very well placed to represent the service at national remembrance events across the UK. Recently, as the detachment commander for the civil service contingent at last year's parade in Whitehall. So, Kevin, on behalf of the Fire Authority, can I wish you and your family all the best for the future, and thank you for all the work that you've done for the fire service in North Wales. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for those words. All I would say is thank you for the support from the authority, and I wish you well in these uncertain times. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Kevin, and good luck. So we'll now move on to the main agenda. The apologies will be as they were for the annual general meeting. Declarations of interest. Any members got any declarations of interest? No, I don't see any. I haven't advised of any notice of urgent matters within this meeting. I now bring you to item 4, notes of the cancelled meeting, which is there for information. Members happy to adopt that report?
Move, Chair.
Okay, put your hands up.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully all members could see that was a very pragmatic approach to dealing with decisions required at the time. So thank you for your support. If you could approve the report, the minute, and endorse it, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any matters arising out of that report? No. Okay, we'll now move on to the Chair's report, which is there for noting. I think we've tried to keep members up to date. I think the Chief and the officers are to be commended for keeping us up to date with appropriate updates during the last few months, and you'll see that both the Chair and Deputy Chair and I have been in meetings with the Chief Fire Officer over that period. So could I have somebody who's prepared to propose we note the report and second it, please?
Move, Chair.
Thank you. Have somebody second it? Okay, thank you.
Can I ofyn cwestiwn?
Yes, go ahead.
O dan 8 a 9...
Under 8 and 9. Can you accept the Welsh?
Yes.
Or he's asking whether people can hear the translation.
I can hear it, Mairig, yes.
There we are, thank you. Number 8 and 9. Was that virtual? Were you at home during those meetings?
In terms of the NJC one you're referring to?
Wel, Prif Swyddog Tân I aelodau, gadeirydd y Prif Swyddog Tân dros...
So, over the last 8 months, it's the consultation for the DTA and so forth. So the ones in number 9 at the end of the reports.
Yes, they've all been done via Zoom or Sky Business, Mairig.
Diolch yn fawr. O, mae'n glir yn y
Thank you very
cofnodion.
much. It wasn't clear in the minutes.
Okay. Members happy to note and approve that report? Okay. Haven't seen any abstentions, so we'll now move on Item 7. Ask, bring the Chief Fire Officer in for item 7, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, Bodadar, Elodai, good morning, members. Can I say, first of all, that I'm not hearing the translation? So I wonder if my IT staff could perhaps have a look at that for me while I'm speaking. As the Chair has said, during the pandemic, I attempted to keep members informed of the activities of the service as much as was possible. We were very busy at the time, but I did provide regular updates. What I thought I would do, though, for the purposes of this meeting, was to try and consolidate some of that and to put some additional information together so that there was a picture of the extent of the activities that the service has had to undertake during the pandemic, and indeed, regrettably, gives a bit of a foretaste of some of the activities that we're expecting to have to undertake in the coming months as the second wave has hit us. So, and I also felt, in terms of having some kind of record for the archives, something for our ongoing history, that it was important to have something in writing that people could refer to in the future if necessary, because we're no doubt living through historic and unprecedented times. So the report that you've got in front of you, members, is hopefully fairly self-explanatory. I just want to draw your attention to a couple of issues contained within the report that I think might be worthy of just a little bit of further explanation. In paragraph 7, I make note that the recruitment activities of the service had to be suspended. That was an unfortunate necessity. We were unable, for a variety of reasons, to recruit and indeed process those recruits to the point at which they could be deployed onto fire appliances and fire stations. And the reference is made later on to some of the difficulties that we had initially being eased. Unfortunately, recruitment is still proving very difficult for a number of reasons. It is still difficult in a COVID environment to process recruits at the rate that we have been used to in the past. But perhaps the most crucial issue is that we've been unable to secure proper medical procedures to give medical examinations to recruits. The occupational health facilities that we use are not undertaking at this time procedures which are aerosol generating, the words procedures which require people to breathe out or to be expelling the contents of whatever's in their lungs into the atmosphere. So, and this is there's a test in our medicals, which is a vitally important part of our medical, where we test somebody's lung function. And unfortunately, that test and the current constraints are not compatible. So it's causing us some quite severe difficulties in getting medicals completed. We are trying to pursue alternative providers of that service, but it's proving very, very difficult indeed. As you can imagine, there's a great demand for there's great demand on the health service at the moment, and we're not able to tap into that. So regrettably, we're not able to catch up with the recruitment that we had to suspend in the spring, and that is quite obviously going to cause us difficulties if it's not causing us difficulties already. On page 10, in paragraph 8, I make mention there of the absence figures that we've had, and would reiterate once again that our absence figures were generally, certainly absence figures directly related to the coronavirus and COVID-19 were generally quite low through the spring and summer, and with a very limited number of individuals who'd received positive tests. That was certainly true at the time of writing the report, but unfortunately since then we are seeing a gradual increase in the number of absences of staff members for coronavirus and COVID related reasons. We've yet, of course, to see the impact of the recent measures introduced by Welsh Government in terms of the fire break, and we hope that those will perhaps stem the increase in absences, but nevertheless, we're seeing absences already slightly above the levels that we were seeing in the spring and summer, and we'll have to monitor that very carefully for its impact on our ability to provide services. And then finally from me, Chair, if I can, on page 11, paragraph 9, I make reference there to the so-called tripartite agreement, which is sort of unique in my experience in the Fire and Rescue Service. That was an agreement between the national employers, the Fire Brigades Union and the National Fire Chiefs Council to introduce work which was outside of the normal employment contract and the normal job description of firefighters and other fire service personnel. That agreement has been kind of hopping along with periodic reviews every couple of months or so, but it's now likely that that agreement, subject to some final work being done, that agreement will be extended until the 31st of March, which gives a little bit more of a firmer base, I think, to look slightly longer term about what can and can't be done. So those were the 3 points I just wanted to raise on the paper. Hopefully the rest is self-explanatory, but I'd be happy to take questions, Chair, if any members have got them.
I've got a question for you from Ian Dunbar.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Chief. The updates were excellent. It kept us all in the loop over the running of the fire service during this COVID-19 pandemic, and it was good to hear that you'd only had 5 positive tests, whereas you look at other areas and it's astronomical. Some of them are very dangerous positions, but it's good to see the fire authority wasn't affected that much. Can I just say I'm pleased as well that the officer, the fire officer that contacted COVID and was in hospital for a long time, I don't know whether he was from the D side or the Wrexham Fire Service, I can't off the top of my head remember his name, that he made a full recovery and he's back in service, which is wonderful, because of the circumstances that a lot of people contact COVID, it's not a happy ending to a lot of people, as we've seen in the news of the people that have contacted it and have been fatal through it. Can I also just point out, I was pleased with the tripartite agreement, that to see that the fire service was involved in the temporary hospitals, in the help with the hospitals, ambulance and all that, because we've got ours apparently in Deeside opening up soon with 30 beds allocated to recuperation from COVID, which is an excellent series, because it's been lying there vacant for a long time, and it's got everything in it that we need to make sure that people are getting the full attention and full care they can do. Because I know for a fact that a lot of the problem that was had was recruitment for the nurses and doctors and all that. But it's good to see that Deeside is being actually used at this time. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Dylan Rees.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd also like to pay tribute to the way that the service, despite all the challenges, has indeed sort of provided the service almost extensively as normal. But one question regarding COVID-19, obviously all the public firework displays were cancelled around November the 5th, and there were concerns that with a number of more private bonfire displays that there may have been increased demands on the service. Did that actually happen?
Would you like me to answer that now, Chair?
Yes, please.
Yeah, first of all, can I say thank you to both Councillor Dunbar and Councillor Rees for their kind words about the service. As you know, I'm inordinately proud of the way that we responded throughout. You know, everybody in the service has played a part in every area of work, and I think our response was bordering on the exemplary, quite frankly, and the low numbers, which Councillor Dunbar has referred to, the low numbers of individual members of staff with COVID problems, I think is a reflection of the measures that we were able to put in place, and indeed people's compliance with those measures as well. As I say, the figures are starting to go up. The pandemic is starting to take a real hold, and we will monitor those. But yeah, I'm grateful for those words. I'm not going to name the individual who was at Deeside Fire Station who became seriously ill, but he certainly featured in the media, so I'm sure everybody knows who he is, and delighted that he, after a number of challenges, is now back fully operational and back at work, and we're pleased with that, very, very pleased with that outcome. In terms of the bonfire night, or bonfire nights, I think is more accurate. It doesn't seem to occur just on one evening anymore. It seems to be a sort of a week long. We had our usual levels of activity in terms of the numbers of times we were advised of bonfires being in existence, controlled burning, those kind of calls were at the same kind of level as we would expect. There was, I think, just one incident where there was an element of some kind of disorder, which was in the Wrexham area, and that was dealt with by the police. But I think it would be wrong to say that this year's circumstances have caused any unusual levels of activity on the part of the Fire and Rescue Service. We were pretty much, it was pretty much a normal bonfire night for us.
Okay, happy, Dylan?
Yes, thank you, Chair. That's reassuring to hear. Thank you.
Okay. Mary?
Diolch yn fawr, Mr. Cadeirydd.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can Simon hear the Welsh now? Fantastic. Can I also thank, and I agree with everything that's been said, the work you've done has been exemplary. It's been a very difficult and confusing situation, and I think it's very important to thank all of you, all the officers, chief officers, and everybody else regarding the day-to-day running of the service. And thank you for that response as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mary. I've got Paul Shotton.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thanks also to the Chief Officer on the work that has been done and is being completed. I know the issues regarding recruitment and operational service has not been affected to date. Just on the tripartite agreement with the additional duties, I take it that most of these would be connected with the NHS, Chair. Thank you.
You want to come back on that, Chief?
Yes, indeed, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Shott, for that question. I'm happy to sort of provide clarification with that. The tripartite agreement has well over a dozen different activities contained within it that may or may not be activated at local level. The activation is dependent on the needs of the different agencies at local level. So that's going to be activated, generally speaking, by the Local Resilience Forum and the Strategic Coordination Group. It's going to be done through that route. As I mentioned in the report, the only request that we've had for one of those activities to be activated has been to provide drivers for the ambulance service. And indeed, that wasn't activated over the spring and summer. That request was only really formalised in October. And at the moment, we're undertaking what I suppose can be called a test of concept. So we've got people who are driving ambulances across North Wales as part of a very complex arrangement that we have with WAST. And that is to test the concept for when we will need to deploy these members of staff in the event that WAST WAST find it necessary to request our assistance. So that's where we are with that at the moment. But it may be, as I indicate in the report, that other areas of the tripartite agreement might be activated over the autumn and winter. But that remains to be seen, and that will, as I say, will be a matter for the LRF and the Strategic Coordination Group.
Okay. Happy, Paul? Right. Can I ask Jeff Lowe to make his comment, please?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the Chief for this presentation this morning. I too would like to offer my thanks to the crews and the fire officers who have continued to deliver a service to the people of North Wales. It is very commendable to all involved, very professional and very caring in these very challenging times. It's a credit to them, it really is. The Chief mentioned the fire break, and like all of us, I'm sure in our various areas we've kept our eyes out and ears open to see what's been happening. The fire break put on by the Welsh Government was there to provide hope that it may provide a reduction in the spread of the virus. I don't know how effective that has been, but for the sake of the people of North Wales and services like the North Wales Fire Service, who are doing their best to deliver these services, are not affected by some of the reckless things we see people doing, because it's that's helping to spread the virus, Chair. And I'd also like to be noted that the North Wales Fire Service, as other colleagues have pointed out, provided support to other organisations, other services, and I think that has helped, and it's been an excellent support, and I'm sure it will continue. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've got nobody else that wishes to speak, but I think it's quite interesting this when you look at the sort of pandemic and what's happened over recent months. I think corroboration has really worked across North Wales, with Colin chairing the Strategic Coordination Group, and we have Assistant Chief Fire Officer Richard Fairhead, who is representing the fire service. And I know from reports that I've seen that they've done sterling work over the months. So can I ask somebody to prepared to propose we note the report and second it?
Move,
please?
Chair.
Thank you, Merrick. Thank you. All in favour? Thank you. Now move on to item 8, which is the draft assessment of authorities' performance 2019-20. And I think Sian's going to take this for us, is she? Thank you.
Diolch, Cadeirydd. Dwi'n gobeithio bod pawb yn clywed.
I hope everyone can hear the translation. Thank you. So the purpose of this report is to present the draft assessment of the authority's performance last year. And the assessment is with you as an appendix, and it was sent to you separately. So the purpose of the assessment is to consider whether or not the authority has achieved its long-term objectives. Secondly, its equalities objections, and then the Welsh language standards. The background in number 6 of the report will be familiar to you. And as you know, the authority is required to publicly report on its performance. Of course, putting everything together into one document is good, so that you get a comprehensive report. However, it does raise problems because the timescales of publication under the different regulations have been set in different months. So because we can't change those dates, because they're statutory, we have published them already on our websites so that we are compliant. And if we do need to make any changes after today, then we can do so. The other disadvantage in including everything into one document is that reading it is a bit of a marathon. And so what we do every year is we produce a summary of the report so that the public can see the main findings of the report. I'll take it for granted that everybody has had a chance to look over the assessment in the attachment, so I won't go through everything. There are 66 pages, so I won't go through them in detail, but briefly, if I can just explain, the first pages give you the context. Then there's the assessment itself from page 22 onwards. Then you'll recall last year the authority had 2 long-term objectives, and so the assessment discusses our progress against these 2 objectives. This year there's more emphasis on including descriptions to explain the work of the authority and the difference that our work does to people's lives. And so that came after recommendation from the Future Generations Commissioner. Then next, we have the action points from our annual plan. And just talk a bit about our progress last year. So the first objective, you'll recall, that this is to help people prevent accidental fires in the home. On page 23, you'll see that over many safe and well checks have been done last year, and that's 1/3 of those were in homes that had been referred to us by other agencies because of some vulnerability in those homes. So this works out as around 400 checks a week across North Wales. On top of that, there was also work to ensure and assess those checks across Wales. Page 25 of the assessment describes the work across the whole of Wales and the community safety messages to get those prevention messages out there. Page 26 describes work in relation to arson and also fires in the open, wildfires. Then you'll see descriptions of how we've adapted our prevention work so that they look at people's individual. So we haven't. So there's not one way to get to everybody, not one size fits all. We've worked with a lot of organisations, either individually or with a lot of different agencies. So many different aspects have been discussed in the assessment. on page 28 and 29, safeguarding and tackling loneliness. Also, yes, again, working with charities and agencies, because we recognise, of course, that we are all part of one agenda to make people safe. On page 30, the first was sharing information, because we recognise that we can keep people safe by sharing information, but that needs to be done in the correct way. The second thing last year was was recognising the forces, and then on the next page we were dealing with offering services within the budget and the finances for that year. And after the meeting today, we can link this page to the report that you will be considering in item 15 on the agenda today. Also, as part of the long-term objective, we describe our work with disadvantaged children through the schools, promoting healthier ways of living, our work with regards to being dementia friendly, and the fire cadets, volunteering, the apprenticeship programme, and so on. So the list is very long. In paragraph 11 of the report, you'll see that in the middle of the report, we discuss how we have complied with the language standards. It's nice to be able to see that we didn't have any complaints with regards to the Welsh language last year, and that's for the third year consecutively. In paragraph 13, you'll see that there is a report against the equality objectives of the authority. Of course, a number of these are parts of the prevention work, but there's a little bit more here about staffing and our positive action work to recruit a more diverse workforce. Then on page 48 to 60, there's information about statistics and performance. I'll also draw your attention to the last bullet points in paragraph 14, which talks about us going into schools and talking with children and young people, looking at the academic year. That's nearly 500 children a week who are listening to one of our talks about fire safety. So we are reaching out to communities. And then lastly, in paragraph 15, the end of the assessment, there's information there, additional information, and also refers to the review by Audit Wales. You'll recall the presentation you got from Audit Wales last month and their recommendations, that we had pockets of good practice, but that there was room for improvements. And for information, we will be discussing this and bringing reports in the next meeting. So that's the end of the report, Chair. The assessment has made good progress with regards to achieving its objectives. And so the recommendations are noted in paragraph number 4. Thank you.
Thank you, Sian, and thank Pippa as well for the work that she's done. I think members are quite used to receiving these performance reports and the amount of information that you put together for our benefit. I think I'm pleased to see anyway that you've highlighted this year are sort of well-being benefits, which perhaps we may have been a bit shy of noting it in the past. Also, that there were no complaints on the Welsh language, which is to be commended. But I think members will be aware of the activity that's been going on over recent months in terms of getting our safety message across to young people in terms of the poster competition and various other initiatives. And obviously, the effect of that won't be visible in the short term, but it will be interesting to see the benefits of that long term. So I very much welcome the report and thank the authors for it. I've got a question for Sian from Ian Dunbar.
Thanks, Chair. Before if I'm allowed to move the recommendations, it's a very comprehensive report, Sian, and I think you've done a lot of work into it to give us an update on, I think, nearly everything that's happening over these pandemic times. Can I just ask you now, the big thing now is we're coming to the talks with Brexit. We've got a big meeting this afternoon with between the EU and UK, and I don't understand how they're going to get around what I'm trying to break the law by over the Northern Ireland border. Can I just ask you? We're all wondering what how things are going to work out, and I assume it's the same as what you've said is the fire service. I can see the couple of disruptions you've got mentioned, you know, to the supply chains. What other impacts have you thought of that it's going to affect the fire service itself? And just, can you explain to me what you say by the financial strain you think the fire service is going to be put under when we actually do get moved from being with the EU? Thanks, Sean.
Can I just clarify, you're not referring to item 10, are you, in terms of the withdrawal from the European Union at all?
Yeah, it's on page 25, Chair.
Well, can we leave that then till that item then and ask Richard to address that for you?
Yeah, no problem in that, Chair.
Thank you. Mary, do you have a question?
Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much. Just to ask a question regarding page 41. I've noticed that you've created a video ar frys with Coleg Cambria. That's very good. Will you also be working with Coleg Llandrilla and Coleg Menai and doing the same sort of work, or have you already done so? Thank you.
Dan ni yn gweithio
Yes, we do work with all the colleges where we can.
Okay, thank you, Mary. I've got Gethin Williams next, please.
Oh, hi, Peter. And yeah, diolch yn fawr, Sian, am yr adroddiad cynhwysfawr.
Thank you, Sian, for the comprehensive report.
Just one little question on page 19, paragraph 14, the third bullet point. 82% of dwelling fires in under 15 minutes. Could I just ask, is any risk attached to the 18% that is not responding to within 15 minutes?
Can I suggest, in the light of your earlier comment to me, that I've addressed that later on in the meeting, if you like to leave that until later. Okay?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Okay, thank you, Peter.
Okay. I've got nobody else with their hand up. So I'm aware Ian actually did propose it, but I'm not quite sure whether it was in relation to item 8. But can I refer you to the recommendations on page 17? And if somebody would kindly
Proposed.
Okay.
Proposed
Second.
by Meirig.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, can I just apologise? My question, as I say, I moved too far through the programme and missed the headings that it was Richard's agenda that I was talking about. I apologise for that, and I will wait for the question from him. But sorry about that, Sean, mixing you up with the wrong agenda.
That's okay, Ian. You obviously want an early lunch.
You're quite right, sir.
Okay, we've had it proposed and seconded then. I take it all in favour. I see no dissension, so okay, we'll now move on to item 9, which is the improvement of wellbeing plan.
Diolch, Cadeirydd.
Thank you, Chair.
Go ahead, Sean.
We'll look now at the plan for next year, and the purpose of this report is to confirm what to include in the improvement and wellbeing plan for 2021-2020. The usual pattern is that a draft for the following financial year is presented to the authority for recommendation every March, and you'll see the things that we have to include in that plan in the background section in the report today. So paragraph 7 to 13. And you'll see in paragraph 12 the 7 objectives that were changed recently and adopted for this year. So the information is there for you. Then we move on to the information section of the report. Some of you who were present at the working group meetings at the beginning of this year will recall that the focus was mainly regarding the environmental agenda, and following the Grenfell tragedy, the two subjects are a little bit sketchy, but there's no issue with including them this year, as is explained in paragraph 6 and 8. If you can recall the 3 things listed in paragraph 20, when you adopted these 7 objectives, the pandemic that has affected somewhat on the planned work for today, and that's at a local, regional and national level. And thirdly, the elections in May 2022. So this time next year, perhaps you will be thinking more what to hand over to the new authority for the following year. So if you can recall those, if you think about those 3 things when we are preparing the draft plan for next year, so that will still be based on the 7 objectives, and there's no reason to change those or expand on them at the moment. And the question rises because you need to confirm that and not just assume that that's good practice to confirm that this is what you intend to do for next year's plan. The recommendation then is that officers draft the plan for next year on the basis of the current set of objectives, and you'll see the recommendations listed there in paragraph number 6. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Sean. I haven't got anybody with their hand up in terms of this. I think it's fortunate, Sean, that at least we did manage to have those working planning meetings prior to the initial lockdown. At least a lot of groundwork was done in order to be able to prepare this improvement plan going forward. So thank you for that. So as Sean has said, the recommendations are on page 21, and that is to endorse the 7 objectives that appear on page 22. So
Move the recommendations, Chair.
thank you. Seconded? Thank you. All in favour? Thank you very much. Now we'll move on to item 10, the long-awaited preparation for the UK's withdrawal from the European Union. So I'm going to ask Richard Fairhead if he would lead on this, please.
Bore pawb, thank you very much, Chair. This report basically is to give members assurance and to inform you of the actions that North Wales Fire and Rescue Service have been taken during the transition period following the UK leaving the European Union. In background to this, the initial vote to leave the EU was in June 2016, and the UK finally left the EU on the end of January 2020, and we've been in a transition period up until, and will be up until the 31st of December. Some information on the 3 main areas where the service has been working. The first one is common and common to most of the public sector, is the issue around potential disruption to supply chains. So we've been working with our suppliers who we get supplies directly from the EU. We've also been working with suppliers who we indirectly get stuff from the EU. So certain of our suppliers are based in the UK, but they will get stocks from the EU. So we've been working to make sure that all the business continuity arrangements are in place. And to answer Councillor Dunbar's question around the financial strain, we're not aware, or we're not sure yet, of what the financial impact will be. Will all the things that we bring across from the EU or have brought across from the EU to deliver our service, is that going to increase in price and therefore put more of a financial strain on the authority? The second area we've worked on is around our staff, and we did this very early on. We've continued to do it, where we've communicated with all members of staff, reminding them that they need to consider the impact of leaving the EU may have on them and on members of their family. And then the third area is external work. We've been working with Local Resilience Forum to look at the combined risks where the EU may have on North Wales. Specifically the areas around Holyhead and the port. There is a tactical coordination group which is running, where we're fully involved, as the potential will be some operational impacts by large numbers of heavy goods vehicles being delayed as they move through the port of Holyhead, either into the UK or out of the UK. And there's a strategic coordination group as well, which I represent the service on, looking at those same issues, which is at the moment basically around the road infrastructure and the border control into the port of Holyhead. Much of this work is theoretical, because we can't actually know exactly how it's going to impact on us, but we are maintaining that watching brief and working closely with partners to ensure that any impacts of leaving the EU are mitigated as far as they can be. The purpose of this report was just so members could understand and be assured that we are taking action, and the recommendation is that members note the information provided in this report.
Thank you, Richard. Ian, are you happy with that response? If you'd like to unmute, Ian.
Sorry about that. I'd just like to apologise to Richard and Sian. I've got that many bits of papers in front of me with the different questions I was going to ask. I've got them mixed up, and I apologise to both of them.
Okay, thank you for that. I've got no other hands raised, so I'm sure Richard is grateful that, given his work with the SCG, that Brexit hasn't been more domineering. So I'm sure members are happy to note that report. You all in favour?
Move, Chair, yes. Yep.
Now we'll move on to item 11. This is the legal challenge to the 2015 pension reforms. And I'm going to bring in Helen MacArthur, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is the first of a number of pension papers on the agenda today, and this paper relates to a legal challenge to the 2015 public sector pension reforms. There's been an awful lot of press about this, and although members may not know the detail, they may have alternatively heard it referred to as either the MacLeod or the Sargent judgment. It is a national issue, and I can't stress that enough, but the purpose of this paper is to provide members with not only the background, but some insight into how the matter will be dealt with by ourselves. Notably, although the legal challenge did initially relate only to the firefighters' pension scheme reforms, the implications are much wider than that and will actually affect all of the public sector pension schemes. By way of a little bit of a background, and I won't go into huge amounts of detail, in 2015, all of the public sector pension schemes were reformed, which resulted in a move away from the traditional final salary link to what's known as a career average scheme. In very brief terms, an individual's pension in a final salary scheme is determined by their years in post and the equivalent full-time salary at the point of retirement. So you build up your pension over the purpose of your career in terms of the years, which actually is calculated right at the end. On a career average scheme, you receive a pension credit for each year or part year of service, which is linked to the salary for that year of service. So effectively, it breaks that final salary links. In addition to that, what the reforms also did was extended the pensionable age. What that means is the age from which you can take your pension. Now, for most of the public sector schemes, the normal retirement age would be 60, and that's been increased to 67. But for the purposes of the firefighters, it increased the pensionable normal retirement age from 55 to 60. The government, in implementing these reforms, they put protection in place for those who were closest to retirement. So what that recognised is that if you were very, very close to retirement, you didn't perhaps have any opportunity of making alternative arrangements. However, the FBU brought a legal challenge on behalf of a number of its members, and they were the claimants, which alleged indirect age discrimination. Because clearly, if you're putting protection in place for those people who are closest to retirement, they are by default going to be those people who are older, and therefore those people who don't receive protection are by default going to be much younger. There was a significant and lengthy legal process, and the High Court ruled in favour of the FBU in 2018. The government did see or attempted to issue an appeal, but they'd actually lost their right to appeal. So winning a court case is actually the first step, but having done that, something needs to happen to put the discrimination. And that isn't dealt with by the courts necessarily, it's dealt with through the employment tribunal process. And this, as you can imagine, is quite a complex process. And actually there are a number of reasons for that. Firstly, the first step is to identify those people who are in scope. Now, clearly the legal case doesn't list every single firefighter, it just brings a test case for a number of claimants. But in terms of applying that across the firefighters, it's been identified that to be eligible for remedy, the individual needed to be a member of the pension scheme between 2012 and 2015. 2015 is quite a critical year, as anybody who joined the service after that year is actually automatically enrolled in the new career average pension scheme. And that's a really, really important point, because the legal challenge wasn't around moving from a final salary to a career average. It was just really around that protection that was afforded to existing members. So the government is absolutely clear that the old final salary schemes are now closed, and anybody who joins moves directly into that career average. And the period of discrimination isn't open-ended. It actually relates to the period of transitional relief that somebody would have received. So the period of discrimination is 7 years, and that runs from 2015 to 2022. So as you can appreciate, we're currently still sat in the middle of it. And after that date, everyone will automatically go into the career average scheme. To add to the complexity, what the UK government accepted was if the age discrimination was there for the firefighters, it needed to apply across the public sector. So the agreed remedy has to work for all of the schemes. Some people, albeit a very, very small number of people, are actually better off in the new scheme. And primarily that's because it affords more flexibility. So clearly, one size doesn't fit all. And what the government has identified is that it's going to propose to allow all members to make a choice. And that choice is either to receive all of their benefits in the final salary scheme for that period of remedy, or alternatively to receive all of their benefits in the career average scheme. But the critical question is actually when you ask people to make that choice. So the UK government, to attempt to find out the one that would be most acceptable, has issued a consultation. That consultation was issued on the 16th of July and ran until the 11th of October. So, and that consultation focused on a number of issues, but the key one was whether to require individuals to make a choice pretty much soon after the 2022 end of remedy period, or actually at some point in the future. And generally that would be when that individual reaches that retirement age. The consultation and responses are in the paper for your information, and members will note that this considered that allowing members the choice at retirement was the most fair. What that's known as is deferred choice underpin. And what it means is at retirement, you effectively will get two pension forecasts, one of which is if that period of remedy you were in the final salary scheme, and second of which is in that you would have been in the career average. And the reason that we opted for that, because intuitively you'd have thought we'd have gone for the ask people to make the choice immediately. The reason that we've gone for that is first and foremost to reduce that discrimination. So clearly, if you're asking somebody to make a choice in 2022, you're assuming that they've got all of the information available to them to make that choice. And that's really, really hard. The firefighters' pension scheme alone is incredibly complex, and it was felt that there wouldn't be sufficient financial advisors who were able to provide members with sufficient information. In addition to that, the administration process is going to be a real challenge for us. Currently, we have automated systems, and quite frankly, the software suppliers said that the opportunity of developing the software and having it operational such that we could provide proper information by 2022 was highly unlikely. So I guess the question really is, what does this mean for the authority? I can't stress enough, it's a national issue, and therefore we have no choice. And following agreement with the Employment Tribunal, the regulations, the underpinning regulations will be amended, and we will be required to follow them. So the critical question for us at the present time is how to treat those members who've naturally transitioned into the career average scheme, but if they'd stayed in the final salary scheme, would have reached retirement age. This is a national issue again, and these members are known as immediate detriment cases. And the important thing is, as a fire and rescue authority, we need to do the right thing. That means we need to be compliant with the regulations, but equally you do recognise that there are individuals involved. It's a UK-wide issue, and currently we are required to follow the regulations. They haven't yet been updated, quite simply because the remedy hasn't been agreed by the Employment Tribunal. We're currently working with the Local Government Association, the Welsh Government, and also the other Welsh Fire and Rescue Authorities. And it's important that we need common agreement of how we proceed if we have legal cover to do so. The current legal position is very unclear at the present time, and acting outside of the regulations would mean that we were potentially ultra vires. And this is a very difficult position, both for those employees who are in scope, but also for us, because we don't actually have the power to proceed. In respect to those individuals, we currently have 7 individuals, and we've contacted them individually, because what that means is that they can receive their 1992 with the final salary benefits, and we're working with them so that they understand the position in all cases. So we are working very, very closely with individuals and also with the lawyers. It's important also that I touch on the financial aspects of the judgment. You will appreciate that the rationale for the pension scheme reforms was to make pensions financially sustainable. And clearly, the remedy will have a negative financial impact. We've known about this for quite some time, and this has already been built into our pension scheme liabilities in the accounts. But the impact on our employer contribution rates hasn't yet been calculated. And that will then form part of the next formal valuation that's undertaken by the Government Actuarial Service. In that respect, the data is ongoing. We're currently collecting the data, and we'll need to submit that by December, and we should have further clarity in the future. So at the moment, we know the estimate of the total liability, but we just don't know how that will then play out in terms of annual contributions. In summary, I appreciate it's quite a technical paper. This is a national issue. It's beyond the control of the Fire Authority in your role as scheme manager, and it will be affecting all of the public sector pension schemes. We've responded to the consultation, and we are working with the Local Government Association and the Welsh Government to agree how we treat those in scope of immediate detriment. However, at this stage, that can only be progressed once we have confirmation that you wouldn't be acting outside of your legal powers. I'm just wondering if there's any questions from members.
Well, can I first of all thank you and Julie Brown and Councillor Brian Apsley for his support in what is, as you've quite rightly highlighted, a very complex issue. But I think the report has been very lucidly written, and as you indicated, it's something that's going to be a recurring issue for the Fire Authority going forward. So I have a question first from Ian Dunbar.
Thanks, Chair, and for a very comprehensive report, Helen, if I must say so. But can I just comment on, as steel workers went through the same change in our pension schemes, and it took over, 18 months to 2 years to come to an agreement. And making up our minds was complex because we didn't act. You don't know the legalities of what's going through. But to give us a hand, a help, we used to have meetings in halls, and we had the pensions people there and all sorts of the new pension scheme people there as well, giving us the advice that we needed. How are you? The fire service giving out the answers to people's questions? And one of the main questions we had while this was going through in the case of the steel workers was in the consultation period, we had people unfortunately dying through it, and a lot of the steel workers there were concerned of what would happen to our partners' rights when this thing first came to fruition. Because, as I say, if you're saying that this is complex and it's out of your hands to sort it out, is that question being raised by some of your members? Thank you, Helen.
Thank you, Councillor Dunbar. I think you make some really, really important points there. The first of which is not only the complexity, but also the long-term nature. And clearly pensions are very, very important to individuals. And I suppose your decision is going to be based on some very often personal circumstances. I'm glad you raised that point, because actually that was one of the reasons that we went for the deferred choice underpin. So a lot of the consultation about the reforms to the pension scheme happened many, many years ago. And this is about ensuring that when somebody comes to that point of retirement, they can make that very informed choice. So one of the reasons that we opted to say, well, deferred choice underpin would be the preferable one for us, was to enable those professional advisors to get into the detail of the pension scheme regulations so that they could actually provide that information and support to members. Currently, until the regulations change, and the detail will be in those, the outcome of the employment tribunal and how that's translated into the regulations, it's not possible for us to support our individual members because we simply don't know. That said, as soon as those regulations change, we will be working both with our representative bodies and also directly with our members to ensure that they fully understand what's happening, the implications of it, and also with our administrators to make sure that those annual pension benefit statements are as comprehensive and up to date as we can make them. So it is something that we're acutely aware of, and we will absolutely have a communication plan in place.
Thank you.
Okay. Brian, Apsley.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to repeat the thanks for a very comprehensive report and the work that's been done for ages. But just for members, suggest reading the link on the bottom of page 29, which is very comprehensive. And just in support of the fact that it is a national problem, is that if people didn't know, MacLeod is a judge, and so obviously supporting the theory that it's a wide range of people that are involved in this difficult court case. So thank you again, and thank you to Helen.
Okay, I've got nobody else with their hands up, so can I refer you to the recommendations on page 28, and there are 4 parts to the recommendations there. So,
move the recommendations, Chair.
Thank you. Seconded?
Yes, seconded.
Thank you. All in favour? Thank you very much. Now we'll move on to item 12, Firefighters Pension Scheme, Local Pension Board Annual Report 2019-20 and updated terms of reference. Again, Helen, good lead on it.
Thank you, Chair. This is the second pension paper on the agenda. As part of the public sector pension reforms that I've just outlined in terms of the legal challenge, the Act also sought to improve the overall governance arrangements. And that really follows on from Councillor Dunbar's comments that it's really important that members have that absolute confidence that their scheme is being administered as well as it can be. The governance arrangements and the requirement to enhance them, it also recognised the complexity of the schemes and the importance both to employees. So it's really important that you make a pension decision, and that's a long-term decision, but also to employers, because it is very costly to employers. And to put that in context, we currently spend about 29% of salary for firefighters. So for every £1 a firefighter earns, we put about 29 pence into the pension schemes. As part of these reforms, all scheme managers were required to establish what's known as a local pension board. So a scheme manager for our firefighters pension scheme is actually the Fire and Rescue Authority. So yourselves are the scheme manager. So there are a number of rules around local pension boards, which include ensuring that there's a balance between employer and employee representatives. And what that really means is that there's different viewpoints. So when you're discussing an issue, you've got both the employer side and also the employee. The chair is rotated between employee and employer side representatives every 2 years. And currently our chair is Councillor Apsley. It's important to recognise what the role of the local pension board is, and it's to support you as scheme managers. And it's really important to note that it is not a decision-making body. So what it's not doing is making decisions on your behalf. What it is doing is looking at a number of aspects and actually either holding myself as an officer and my colleagues to account, or indeed just trying to understand it and perhaps pointing us in the direction that we need to go in. The local pension board meets on 4 occasions during the year and discusses a range of issues, including the day-to-day administration, so getting that assurance that the pensions are being processed as they should have been, the overall governance of the scheme in terms of issues such as risk management, and also those specific issues such as the legal challenge that we've just discussed. A key aspect of any pension board is its transparency, and what the annual report does, and that's in your papers for information, is provide that transparency. So it provides that assurance to you as a scheme manager that the local pension board is established. It meets on the requisite number of occasions. We've got that balance between the employers and the employees, and also it outlines some of the issues that we discussed. Also on the agenda today are the terms of reference. Terms of reference, really that framework about how we hold our business, who is a member, and some of the issues that we discussed. And there was a minor amendment this year. So across Wales, in conjunction with the Scheme Advisory Board, we all reviewed our individual terms of reference against the good practice, and we made a very minor adjustment to ensure that the voting rights of each of the members was fully confirmed. What the local pension board annual report also does is provides details of the training to members. So again, what's really, really important is that those members around the table are actually familiar with the underlying issues and understand the environment within which the local pension board operates. The pensions regulator provides a set of training, and that training is undertaken by each and every one of the members. Recognising that it is a complex area, we also provide a training event at each and every meeting. So the report outlines some of the issues that were discussed. And this is, if it's relevant, so things like split pensions, we can actually have a session. What that affords all of the members to do is the opportunity of asking for information in more detail. We also have a routine programme of work, and that ensures that the administration arrangements are sound, and that includes the provision of annual benefit statements. Annual benefit statements are a key document. They're issued once a year, and it enables individuals who are members of the pension scheme that opportunity of reading through it and raising any queries that they have. The administrators also receive regular updates from the Welsh Government, so the regulations do change periodically, and it's important that our administrators are working to the correct regulations. So we also receive assurance that the Welsh Government circulars have been updated. During the year, there was a consultation on the exit cap in the public sector, and that was very much if somebody leaves a public sector body, the amount that they can receive over enhanced is now £95,000, and that impacts on pensions. So again, the local pension board was cited on that. They also receive updates on legal matters, and during the year they reviewed the conflicts of interest policy. It's really important that as around that table, if somebody has a particular conflict, that we're cited on it. And then more importantly, at each meeting, we discuss the risk register. So some of those risks will be around the ongoing administration, and some of those risks will be financial, some will be legal. So at each meeting, we have that risk register. We don't have the whole risk register, we do it on a cycle, and that means enables the members to actually get into the detail. So in the pack today is the annual report relating to 2019-20 and the terms of reference that will cover the period 2020-21. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Well, I think you've floored people. There's no raised hands here, but I think it's quite clear from the report, the annual report, and the terms of reference there are itemised under Appendix 2. Oh, I've got a raised hand. Paul Shotton.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's again, it's a very comprehensive report, and I'm pleased that you've raised the issues on the training, because especially concerning pensions, which we know are very, very complex, and at the present time, the volatility in the financial markets, it just shows that training needs to be paramount. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Are you prepared to propose that we
Yes,
note
to
the
propose
report?
move the minutes, Chair.
Somebody second it? Thank you, John. All in favour? Thank you. We'll now move on to item 13, Firefighters Pension Schemes Discretionary Policy Statement. And Helen again.
Absolutely. This is the third paper. Largely, the rules of the pension scheme are embedded in the legal regulations, and those regulations are approved by Welsh ministers. So they're set out in law. What that does, it ensures a fair and consistent treatment for all members of the firefighter pension scheme. However, there are a number of areas in which the regulations actually allow for local discretion to be exercised by yourselves as the scheme manager. It's good practice that each scheme manager should have what's known as a discretionary policy. And that again provides that transparency to scheme members on those discretionary elements. It tells them how they're going to be applied and therefore how as individuals they will be treated. The need to have a discretionary policy isn't new, and you will have seen this in previous years. And the good practice is that every 2 years we actually work through the regulations, we work through those discretions, we revisit them, and therefore we bring them to yourselves for approval. What that ensures is that they remain current and they remain fit for purpose. And if we've experienced any difficulties, we can review those. So the purpose of the report today is to set out those areas of discretion, individually to provide some background against each discretion, and also to put forward a recommendation to yourselves for each one. And that really is around whether they should be applied or not, and if so, how. It's a very lengthy document, and in total there are 80 delegations. Some relate to the day-to-day administration, that business as usual, and one of those examples would be how a scheme manager opts into the scheme and the requirement for us to have those pension accounts. Others relate to more specific issues that occur less frequently. And to give you an example of that, it would be how the benefits are distributed to a firefighter's dependents on the sad occasion that they pass away whilst in service. Clearly, it would be very unworkable for a report to be brought to yourselves as the scheme manager each and every time a day-to-day discretion was required. So the first and probably the most important delegation relates to the general delegation to the Chief Fire Officer. This is absolutely consistent with the scheme of delegation that sits within our constitution. And therefore, within this, all of the administrative functions are delegated to the Chief. And in turn, these are then embedded in our normal day-to-day administrative processes. And what that ensures is that all of our members are treated fairly and equally. However, there are some areas which again relate to the day-to-day administration, but cases need to be considered individually based on their own merit. Such cases would normally be determined by the Chief Fire Officer in line with the delegation, but actually perhaps require a second opinion or consultation with either the Treasurer or the Monitoring Officer. They cover a range of issues, such as allowing someone to transfer their benefits into the scheme outside of the normal 12-month window. What that relates to is if you joined our scheme from another public sector body, you actually get 12 months to transfer that in. In exceptional circumstances, somebody may say, I haven't done it for these reasons. And it would be very black and white to say, sorry, it was a 12-month window, you can't possibly. But what that enables, the discretion enables, is the Chief Fire Officer to actually look at each case on a case-by-case basis. Equally, there's some areas which is, may have withhold pension in the event of a crime, or it might be something as who receives the pension benefit in the event of a death in service. I think it's really, really important to note that in respect of any queries regarding legality, these are always referred to legal advice. So anything contentious is dealt with in consultation with our lawyers. I don't intend to go through each and every single one of the delegations, but if there are any specific queries, I'm really happy to take those.
Thank you, Helen. I think, again, the report really is laid out all those recommendations, and having read them myself, I think they're quite fitting. So any members got any questions? I think the other reassurance too was that the local pension board had no issues either, so that's another plus, we could say. Well, obviously members have been floored by that presentation, so I'm going to ask if I could have somebody propose and second to
move the recommendation.
Good report, yeah.
Okay.
Second, Chair.
All in favour? Okay. And I think before we actually leave pensions, I again would like to, on behalf of the Fire Authority, express our thanks to you, Helen, and Julie, for the work you do on this. I think we all, having read those papers, appreciate the complexity of the issue, and it's nice to know that we've got people on board to be able to get the difference between the wood and the trees. Thank you again.
Thank you, Chair.
Here, Chair. Here.
So we now move on to item 14, Internal Audit Annual Report 2019-20. And I'm assuming Keith Williams is taking this, is he?
I am, yes.
Thank you.
Morning.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Yes, this is the Internal Audit Annual Report for 1920. Under the terms of the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2014, the North Wales Fire and Rescue Authority is required annually to conduct a review of the effectiveness of its system of internal control. And obviously internal audit is an integral part of that system and a significant contributor to the preparation of the annual governance statement. The public sector internal audit standards require the head of internal audit to provide the audit committee.
Can't hear it, Chair.
Sorry, can everyone hear me? I'm not on mute.
Yes, there was just a slight break. You may find it helpful if you actually close down your video, Keith.
Okay, I'll try that. Is that better?
Yes.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'll go back to that paragraph 2. So the public sector internal audit standards require the head of internal audit to provide the audit committee with assurance on the whole system of internal control, including the adequacy of risk management and its corporate governance arrangement. This report analyses the work of Internal Audit Service for 1920 and contains the assurance statement based on the work of internal audit during the year. As part of the service level agreement between the authority and Conwy County Borough Council, 50 days of internal audit work was performed during 1920 in accordance with the planned allocation. The audit reviews provide a positive level of assurance upon the adequacy of the systems of internal control in place, although 12 recommendations have been made in the year to address some of the weaknesses that we found. The formal follow-up process is in place to ensure that all recommendations are implemented and within agreed timescales. The work of internal audit has not identified any weaknesses that would qualify this opinion, and there are no significant issues that are relevant to the preparation of the annual governance statement. If I can take you to paragraph 14, which is essentially the internal audit opinion for 1920. Internal audit is satisfied with the work that we've undertaken in the year, together with our maintained knowledge of the organisation and of its procedures, allows me to draw a reasonable conclusion as to the adequacy and effectiveness of the authority's risk management, control and governance processes. It is my opinion that the authority has adequate and effective control processes to manage its achievement of the authority's objectives for the 12-month period to the end of March. Paragraph 19 refers to the summary of work supporting the audit opinion for 1920. So if I could take you to Appendix A, which is on page 99. This is a schedule of the work that was undertaken in the year. Just to clarify, all our audit opinions are categorised as providing high, satisfactory, limited or no assurance. And similarly, the recommendations there are either critical, major, moderate or minor. I won't go through in any detail with the recommendations, but you'll see there's an audit there on fleet management, and there's 12 key messages and recommendations there for improvement. I apologise, there is a typo there in the audit opinion. That it's actually reading as high, but that was actually a satisfactory audit opinion. As I've mentioned, there's a follow-up process in place, and the follow-up for fleet management is scheduled for January. The other job that was undertaken, National Fraud Initiative. This is, I'm sure you're aware, is a data matching exercise organised by the Cabinet Office in partnership with Audit Wales. The exercise identified 465 data matches. 132 were investigated on a judgmental basis, and no significant issues were identified, resulting in a high assurance rating. If I can take you to Appendix B, which is on page 101. This is a schedule of the follow-up audits undertaken in 1920. As I previously said, any audits recommendations that are made, we obviously follow them up usually within 6 months to ensure those recommendations have been implemented. There were significant improvements in the level of internal control in relation to the creditor system and income and debtors. You'll notice the original creditors audit made 9 recommendations. At the time of the follow-up, there was 3 that was categorised as outstanding. However, 2 of them were actually work in progress, and work was ongoing on 2 of those recommendations. Income and debtors, there were 7 original recommendations, and 1 again was work in progress at the time of the follow-up audit. Much of the work on the purchase card or follow-up was undertaken in February, but it had to be delayed due to COVID in March. There was 12 recommendations made in that audit, and that's actually ongoing this week, the follow-up, so it should be completed by the end of this week. Going to take you to Appendix C, which is a summary of the internal audit work for the year. As stated, it's part of the SLA to provide 50 days work on an annual basis. And you'll see on the column on the right-hand side the work that was undertaken in the year. 17 days on fleet management, 11 days on NFI. We had 5.5 days on a consultancy basis regarding the implementation of the new iTrent payroll system. Grant income audit was planned for the year, but in agreement with management, it was delayed. Grant income is treated differently in the ledger as of 1920, and it was a period of transition really in reporting, so it was agreed to delay that. You see there was 10.5 days undertaken on the audit follow-ups to ensure that the implementation of 28 recommendations, and there were 6 days taken on planning, reporting, attending audit committee and things like that, which comes to the 50 days which is within the SLA. If I can take you back to the report recommendation, which is on paragraph 9. The committee should note the contents of the Head of Audit and Procurement's annual report and the overall opinion upon the adequacy and effectiveness of the authority's framework for governance, risk management and control. And I'll happily take any questions that members may have.
Thank you, Keith, for walking us through that report. Just a question for me, really. I acknowledge that COVID is inevitably, I know, put a lot of pressure on all finance departments within local authorities and whatever. But in terms of the payroll iTrent implementation, what's the sort of envisaged time scale for that going forward? Is there any indication at this stage?
I think probably Helen can update you in more detail, but I spoke to Conway's payroll this week, and I think they're getting very close now with balancing the pensions and what have you on the payroll runs. So I think I'm right in saying it's ready to go live before the end of the year. I'm sure Helen may be able to confirm that for you.
Yeah, I think Keith has just pretty much stolen my thunder. The iTrent implementation was initially scheduled for April 2020, and we took the really, really difficult decision as we all went into lockdown that moving to a new payroll system at a point when we couldn't be assured that all of the staff and all the personnel were in post would be really, really difficult. So accordingly, we took that decision to defer it. Thankfully, that was re-energised probably about August time, and we've just completed our third parallel run. And I'm really, really pleased to be able to confirm that the system is operating as we would expect. So what you do in your parallel run is you compare the transactions between the old system and the new system, and it is doing what we need it to do. So as Keith has just confirmed, we're actually at that stage now where we're actually looking at all of the balancing, looking at all the feeds into the ledger, making sure that things like the feed to HMRC works, making sure that the feed into the pension scheme works. So we're in a really, really good place, and we're fully envisaging that we'll be going live within the next month. So thank you.
Okay, thank you both for that update. I look forward to receiving the update at our meeting in March. I've got a question from Ian Dunbar.
Thanks, Chair. It's on page 97, Keith, 24.
Yep.
The weaknesses identified during the fleet audit review, there was 12 recommendations. Were they a severe recommendations, or were they just run-of-the-mill type of thing? Because on fleets, we need to make sure that they're up to scratch. I was just wondering what the recommendations were included, please.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
If you flick to page 99 and Appendix A, there's a schedule there, and the first audit there is fleet management. There's a list there of the 12 recommendations that were made. They were categorised as 5 moderate and 7 minor. And like I say, it was satisfactory assurance. Can you see that?
Yeah, I've got it now. That's where I'm coming from with the question. Is where were the difference between the 5 and the moderate and the minor? Were there any severe problems?
No, generally the fleet department is very well run, but obviously when you're looking through a range of services, you're going to find recommendations. Obviously, I suppose number 2, a procedures manual is pretty important. So all staff, if there is people absent from work, other people can just take on, and the procedures there in place for them written, and the internal controls that are expected. But like I say, looking down the list, their recommendations really to improve the system rather than real weaknesses in internal control. And like I say, we've put the follow-up off. Due to COVID, but obviously it's scheduled for January, so we'll go in and make sure those recommendations have been implemented.
That's fine. Thanks for that, Keith.
Thank you.
Okay.
Paul Shotton.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Keith, for the audit report. As there have been no significant issues have been raised, I move the recommendations, Chair.
Okay, appreciate that, Paul. Do I have somebody to second them? Okay, thank you. All in favour? Thank you. And thank you, Keith, for the work you do in that respect, and appreciate your report. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now move on to item 15, which is the audited statement of accounts and annual governance statement 2019-20. I think Ken's leading on this. Ken?
Chair, if I may, I'm happy to lead on this, and I think Ken was perhaps going to come in after I'd provided members with a very brief update.
Okay, fine.
Thank you very much.
I was trying to give you a break.
It's very kind. The purpose of this report is to present both the final audited statement of accounts and also the annual governance statement for approval by members. So it leads on quite nicely from Keith's update, which confirms in terms of our overall control arrangements. Those documents should be familiar to you because we discussed them at the member briefing on the 12th of October. But they're also included within your appendix, in your packs as an appendix. The draft accounts and the annual governance statement are normally prepared by the 31st of May, and following audit, they're approved by the 31st of July. And in between May and July is obviously the audit process. However, as you'll appreciate, this year has been absolutely exceptional, and the approval deadline has been extended to the 30th of November. I think what I would like to do is formally record my thanks to both Helen Howard, who's our head of finance, and Graham Williams from the finance team in Conway for all of their hard work, as despite the challenges of COVID-19, we were able to achieve the normal deadline of the 31st of May. And in fact, I think we also had a couple of days to spare. So huge amounts of hard work. But what that enabled us to do was really focus on the current financial year and making sure that we supported the service in terms of its needs during the COVID pandemic. That said, the extended audit deadline was actually quite fortuitous, as due to the legal challenge that I outlined earlier, it was necessary to make an adjustment in the accounts. What happened is the government issued its consultation, which gave more clarity about what they were going to do in respect to the legal challenge. And accordingly, what we had to do in common with most other public sector bodies was actually go back to our actuaries and have an updated valuation. So an updated set of accounts and the annual governance statement is in your pack, but I appreciate that some of the figures contained within the accounts may not be totally familiar to you. And in part, this is because the accounts are prepared using the technical accounting standards, which are the international accounting standards. So these are the standards that you would use whether you be a big global organisation or indeed a public sector body such as ourselves. And therefore, they make quite a number of technical adjustments, which makes comparison with the normal management accounts that you receive at each meeting quite challenging. Accordingly, to make the accounts more meaningful to the reader, we actually produce a narrative report. And what that does is takes those technical accounts and actually then brings them back to those management accounts. It provides that context also in terms of our work areas, the geographical areas that we cover, the physical resources that are available to us, and that covers not only our buildings, the appliances, but also our staff base. So it's really about how we deliver our service. And in addition to that, we've some bullet points around our activities. And members, I would refer you to pages 4 and 10 of the accounts, and that sets out the narrative. In broad summary, we received £35.2 million from our constituent authorities and also revenue grants of just over £2 million. In addition to that, we received a very, very small amount of interest from our surplus cash. So I'm sure we're all aware the interest rates being as they are at the present time, there's very little return when you've got that surplus cash. So the important thing is that we effectively don't draw down ahead of need. I've also included a summary of the revenue grants within the covering report, and members will note that the main grant relates to £1.1 million in respect of the pension support from the Welsh Government. And we also received £400,000 in respect of the emergency services network. And it's really, really important to recognise those because they are the grants that actually support our core funding, but they are sadly by no means guaranteed. And on an annual basis, the Welsh Government confirm those. Employee costs continue to represent our largest element of expenditure. It's over 70%, and our other running costs are about 20%. Worth noting, of course, that the capital financing costs are also about 8%. Capital financing is largely covered by borrowing, but each year you put the cost of borrowing to your revenue and also a charge for using the asset. During the year, Due to vacancies, we were able to establish a number of earmarked reserves. And what these relate to are areas of known cost or future risk for which we're able to put money aside. That's a very prudent thing to do. What we don't want to do is be in that position at year end where we just try and spend all of our money. And this was possible primarily due to vacancies, favourable interest rates on our borrowing, and also those gains arising from our capital financing costs. So what members will be aware of is for the last couple of years, we've really deferred a number of big capital projects, and therefore we've not needed as much capital cover as we did. That's on the revenue side. Always worth looking at the balance sheet as well. So the value of our assets as at the 31st of March is only a very approximate, because what you don't do is necessarily, you don't know what the market value of those assets are. But the value of the assets were estimated to be in the region of £45.9 million, and they covered a range from property, all of our buildings, the plant that we've got, and also our equipment. So members will be aware that we purchase our fire appliances, we don't lease them, and also equipment will be everything from our firefighters' PPE, so the kits that they wear, right through to our ICT assets. We don't use our revenue funding to fund capital, we borrow, and the value of the loans against those assets were £30.9 million. I'm not going to go into any detail about the loans, because I know that Graham Williams is going to pick those up in the next report. There's been an awful lot of discussion about pension, and I'd like to draw your attention to the value of the pension scheme liabilities, both for firefighters and staff employed on local government terms and conditions. As at the balance sheet date, the liabilities equated to just over £300,000, which reflects the long-term commitment. So that very much is, if the Fire and Rescue Service ceased to exist in March 2020, that would be the amount that would need to be found from the public purse to make good on all of the pension that's been built up by our employees. There are a number of recommendations for members, but before considering those, I would like to draw attention to Appendix 3 of the papers. That relates to the report that's been prepared by our external auditor. I'm not going to go into that in any detail, but I would ask Amanda if she would like to talk to the audit through the audit process and the subsequent report.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Chair. Our audit report, so you'll all be familiar with the report that we provide you on the financial statements. So we're required under the auditing standards to report to those charged with governance, which is yourself, with the to summarise effectively our audit findings, and obviously that you consider our report prior to your approval of the accounts, which hopefully you'll be in a position to do shortly. So the report, I'm sure in its format is familiar. You'll have seen it here before and at your constituent authorities, but effectively it summarises the nature of the work that we do, and as you'll appreciate, we're looking to give an opinion on the financial statements to determine whether they're true and fair. So that doesn't necessarily mean that they're accurate in every single respect, but that we apply a concept of materiality to the accounts. You'll be pleased to know that we intend to issue an unqualified opinion on your accounts, and therefore that they are true and fair in that sense. But there are a couple of things to draw your attention to. Just slightly go back to mention, to recount some of what Helen said. As Helen said, you produced the accounts by the 29th of May, which was actually marginally ahead of the statutory deadline. I think given the situation with the pandemic, etc., I think that's of credit to your team and your staff, and you know, that's great news. We were able to conduct the audit. I've set out in Exhibit 1 of our report a number of things which effectively resulted in us perhaps having to change and work differently in the way we did our audit, because obviously we were working virtually alongside you equally working virtually, and I've summarised in the report a number of those things. The key matter arising from the audit, you'll be pleased to know that there were no uncorrected misstatements that remain uncorrected. There have been some corrected misstatements, and Helen referred to some in relation to pensions, which we've set out in Appendix 3. The two main things to draw to your attention from the audit were the fact that, and I've summarised those in Exhibit 2. Firstly, our opinion, although we've not, it's not modified in any way, in other words, we've issued you an unqualified opinion, we have included within our audit opinion what we call an emphasis of matter. And what that is where we believe there's something of significance in the account to reader of the account's attention to it through our audit opinion. So whilst we have issued a true and fair unqualified audit opinion, we've included an emphasis of matter to do with the fact that some of the underlying assets belonging to the Fire Authority that are sat within the pension funds and it relates actually to those in the Clwyd Pension Fund. So for the non-firefighter staff element of your pension liabilities, a number of the investments in the Clwyd Pension Fund have underlying investments in property, and as a result of the uncertainty caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, there effectively obviously was a lot of uncertainty around the 31st of March about the valuation of property, and as a result of that, all investment managers relating to property funds included what they called a material valuation uncertainty clause in their valuation report, and that was reflected through into therefore the investment reports that came through to the pension fund. And the emphasis of matter is just drawing the reader's attention to the fact that of your authority, of the Fire Authority's share of the assets belonging in the Clwyd Pension Fund, about 2 million of those have these underlying material valuation uncertainties attached to them. To also point out in relation to that we have included similar emphasis of matter in a number of local authority and the other Fire Authority accounts for exactly the same reason. So it is an issue that relates to all, or potentially relates to all. And then the second thing to note is already been touched on several times, which is the McLeod Sargent remedy. Last year, the cost of the McLeod Sargent, the implications of McLeod Sargent were accounted for within the pension fund liabilities. But during this year, as a result of this consultation that's been mentioned, I guess some of the criteria and some of the thinking around the exact calculation of that was finessed, and as a result of that, there was an amendment which was to the tune of about 1.5 million to the liabilities. In fact, it was a reduction, so it was an improvement. But effectively, that had to come through, and those amendments were made. But as a number of times, that's a national issue and will have impacted most all bodies where McLeod Sargent applied. So they're the only particular issues that I'm reporting, but just to say, actually, it's pleasing to note that the authority has implemented all of our previous recommendations, and in fact, the accounts are now prepared to a good standard, and that's great news. So from my point of view, prior to you approving the accounts and prior to the Auditor General signing his audit opinion, which is due to happen tomorrow, I need you to provide a letter of representation to us, which is in Appendix 1. But otherwise, to just note our findings in the report. Thank you very much.
Well, can I both welcome you and thank you, Amanda, from the Audit Office. I think there's a credit here, as you quite rightly highlighted, that the speed that the finance officers within the fire service were able to get the accounts out in the end of May, given what else was going on. So I'm sure Helen will pass our gratitude on to those appropriate officers. I have a question for somebody anyway, whether it's Helen or Amanda from Mairig.
Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you very much. Just to declare an interest, Chair. I'm on the Clwyd pension, just to declare an interest, just in case that's of importance.
Okay, it's noted, Mary. I don't regard it as prejudicial, but it's noted. Any further questions on this audit statement of accounts? No? Well, can I draw your attention then to the recommendations which appear on both pages 103, 104. There are 5 parts to it there, which is to approve the audited outturn position and performance as detailed within the 2019-20 Statement of Accounts, Appendix 1. Approve the earmarked reserves carried forward as at the 31st of March 2020. Approve the governance arrangements and action plan as outlined within the 2019-20 Annual Governance Statement, Appendix 2. Note the report of the Auditor General for Wales, which confirms an unqualified audit opinion, Appendix 3, and approve the proposed letter of representation. Could I have somebody to propose that, please? Thank you, Brian. Has been seconded. All members in support? Thank you. I'll now move on to item 16. That's the Treasury Management Activity and Actual Prudential Indicators for 2019-2020. I'm assuming Ken's going to take this item.
Hello, I don't know if Ken's all right with me just running through the main points.
Go ahead, Graham.
That's okay.
Yeah, beat me to it.
Sorry, yeah, was that okay, Ken?
Yes.
Oh, great, thanks. So agenda item number 16 relates to the Treasury Management Activity and Actual Prudential Indicators for 2019-20. I know Helen touched on some of the figures during the last agenda item, and I know a lot of you will be familiar with our Treasury Management activities, so I'll run through the report, the main areas, and then if you've got any questions, I can come back to them then, if that's okay. So this report, it touches on the borrowing, Treasury Management activities, which were mainly the borrowing and the investments that the Fire Authority put in place during 2019-20. The executive summary shows that there's 30.9 million of borrowing outstanding at the end of the year, and 16 million related to short-term loans and 14.9 million related to long-term loans. And there's more details regarding these loans as we go through the report. So if we look at the background, there's usually 3 reports that are presented to the Fire Authority. This is one of them, whereby we look back at the previous year, 1920, and hopefully the members will agree with the potential indicators that are there. And then we set the potential indicators in March, and then we have an updated report mid-year to update members on the situation. So I'll just scroll down. So if we look at the information, the agreed strategy is the day-to-day decisions will be taken by the treasurer, and the most appropriate form of borrowing will be taken. So the Treasury Management function is undertaken in Conwy Council. So there's a team there that take care of Treasury Management on a day-to-day basis, analysing the cash flow. And the Treasury Management is mainly to ensure our risks are kept to a minimum and that we maintain a good cash flow in order that we can pay our creditors and pay our payroll and so forth. So there's a cautious approach. We're not there to make money, so our investments are there mainly for cash flow purposes. So from a borrowing activity point of view, there's a table in paragraph 10, which identifies when our long-term borrowing, when they're made to be paid back, basically. And it shows the percentages on a 1 to 2 year basis, 2 to 5 year, 5 to 10, and 10 years or more. and that's where the total of the 14.9 million comes from. And if we go back, go down to paragraph 12, there's a table there which gives some analysis of the short term. And our short term are based on borrowings from other public sector local bodies. And there's 16 million there broken down. With these short-term borrowing, the short-term borrowings do have a more favourable borrowing interest rates. So long-term borrowing, it's from PWLB is 1.95%, where the short-term borrowing, it ranges from, I can see this here. So there was an average rate of 0.28%. That's in paragraph 19. So there we have some information on the long-term and the short-term borrowing. All the borrowing was on a fixed-term basis, so that makes sure that we reduce our risks of fluctuations in interest rates. As you know, it's been in the news whereby interest rates are at all-time low. So from a borrowing side, where it's favourable, and interest-based, we're hardly having any kind of return on our interests. The main concern, if you like, as you probably heard, if there's negative interest rates. So that's something that we're looking at with our consultants as well to see how that might affect public bodies going forward. The idea is that we'd probably be paying for them to keep our money, but we're keeping it to a minimum, and as we're saying, it's for cash flow purposes. And our investments, we ensure that our investments are with firm kind of banks and so forth, whereby there's minimum risk to the fire authority. So coming down to the potential indicators in paragraph 21, the actual borrowing at the year end, as Helen touched on earlier on, was 30.9 million. The capital finance requirements, 31.7 million. So our borrowing was less than our capital finance requirements. And our capital finance requirement, that became less than our estimated amount because the capital spend was less as well. So there's all these kind of decisions whereby what our capital spend on has a knock-on effect with our borrowing and so forth. So if we go down to the appendix A shows what the estimated indicators were. So I won't go through individual ones. There we go, sorry. The capital expenditure, as an example, we were estimating it to be 2 million. At the year end, it came to 774,000. So therefore, our borrowing need was less than first anticipated. So this table here provides details of what our estimates were compared to what they were at the end of the year. So hopefully the members will agree with what our potential indicators were and take note of the financial management information within the report. So I just wanted to go through and touch on the main points, and if you've got any questions, I'm happy for any questions on that agenda item.
Thank you, Graham, for walking us through that. I've got a question from Mary, please.
Diolch yn fawr, Cadeirydd.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you, Graham, for the report. Do we pay our debts where there's a opportunity to do that? Do we have a comparison of that? Thank you. Yes, we do. With the debts, what we do, we pay them as they come to an end, and the capital finance requirement says how much we have to pay off in a way, and that changes every year. And that's why I was trying to explain where capital expenditure is less. That means that we don't have to borrow as much when the debts come to an end. So we pay it off. And then perhaps because expenditure has been less one year, then actually we look at the changes going forward. And then depending on the capital expenditure. I don't know whether that's helpful.
Okay. Any other further questions from members? Nobody indicating. So can I take you to the recommendations then on page 108? It's in two parts. Note the Treasury management activity and approve the final prudential indicators for 2019-20. Somebody would like to propose?
Derbyn.
Seconded. Thank you. All in favour? Thank you. We'll now move on to item 17, which is related in many ways. Treasury management and prudential indicators. I'm assuming, Graham, you're going to take this one.
Yes, if that's okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Plan to do the same thing, running forward with this report, whereby picking up the main issues, and then if you've got any questions, just ask me towards the end, if that's okay. This report, as touched on earlier, this is an update of what the current situation is. So this is the mid-year report. So it takes into account that the capital spend from last year was less than anticipated. That, as I touched on, has a knock-on effect on the capital finance requirement. So borrowing needs might reduce. So if I touch on the recommendations, so the recommendations, members are asked to approve the amended prudential indicators set out in Appendix A. So yeah.
Fine.
So we're looking at the prudential indicators as they are now, with different estimates going forward as to what our capital spend is going to be in the future. Naturally, with COVID-19, this is based on the best information that we have to hand. So it might change going forward, but the idea is that we keep you informed and that you know what our situation is as it comes to fruition. So there's the background, just explaining the Treasury Management Report and the Prudential Code, why we're reporting these to you. Prudential Indicator 2021. Okay, so in paragraph 8, you'll see that the reduced capital programme in 1920, you might remember from the last report, it was over 2 million and it came in at 775,000. So that has a knock-on effect whereby the CFR will have reduced. So the original budget was set for, this is for the minimum revenue provision, sorry. This is what we charge to the revenue for our borrowing needs. So we had a budget, original budget of 2.27 million, and this has now been revised to 2.21 million. This is simply because there's less kind of pressure to pay that through the revenue. The reduced capital programme for 1920 and 21 has meant that all the indicators approved at the start of the year now need to reflect the changes, hence the changes in the appendix. And just to touch on, I'm sure you're all familiar with these terms, but the capital finance requirement, that's our outstanding borrowing requirements, if you like. The operational boundaries is there to set a limit of when it becomes close to our limits of how much we should borrow, because there's restrictions on what we should borrow on. And the authorised limit, this is what you're setting as to what we cannot borrow over for our capital needs and so forth. So these are the prudential indicators that you're going to be setting as to what the authority can borrow. Just to touch on what our current loan situation is, we've currently got loans of 27.7 million outstanding, 13.7 million with PWLB and 14 million with other authorities. So the PWLB is long term, other authorities would be short term. This is what, the current interest rates with short term borrowing is currently 0.01% and 0.2%. So as you can see, these were the figures I was looking for during the last report, where they're fresh in my mind, whereby we're hardly getting any return on our investments. So as pointed out earlier on, our investments are in call centres where we can call on those with no restrictions, if you like, so we can have a fluid borrowing for our cash management. No PWLB loans have been taken out this year so far, and the current rate is 1.95. Again, the investments, just to state that we do put them in secure kind of holdings, because we're not there to make money, we're there to safeguard what we have. The main focus for the fire authority is not to make money, it's to save lives. Then we have surplus cash. These are the breakdowns of the surplus cash. So you've got the principal, 840,000 with Bank of Scotland, 1.8 million with Barclays. And these are the different interest rates that we currently have. So as you can see, touching on it again, the interest rates are very low. Our Treasury Management Advisors are enclosed. They keep us up to date with how things look towards in the future. So the best of their knowledge, they'll provide us with information, they'll provide us with guidance, and that enables us to make sure that we're minimizing the risk to the fire authority. Other risks, COVID-19, again, has been touched on a lot this morning, whereby there's uncertainty, certainly uncertainty with how the capital programme went. There's still uncertainty going forward. So it's just identifying various risks. And of course, again, touched on this morning, Brexit is still an unknown factor. How this will affect interest rates going forward, along with COVID-19, it's a very unknown kind of situation that we see ourselves in. So it's making sure that we minimize the risks that we have with our treasury management function for the fire service. And then if I go down to Appendix A, these are estimates of what the potential indicators will be for this year based on the information that we have, and estimates on the capital programme going forward, which will then have an effect on the capital finance requirement, which in turn have an effect on how much we need to borrow. So again, I think Helen touched on it when she was in the presentation on the statement of accounts with capital financing costs. So we're looking at around 8% as the ratio of financial costs to net revenue streams, which isn't uncommon with other public authorities. So yeah, that's Appendix A. So I'm happy to try and answer any questions that anybody might have.
Thank you, Graham. Meg's got a question for you, I think.
Diolch yn fawr, diolch yn fawr. Diolch, Graham.
Thank you very much. With investments, I've noticed, where has the AAA gone? I noticed, that was important at one point. Have the banks lost that by now? There's only one A. Thank you. Yes, with regards to that, we get those from Arlene Close. And it's funny that you've asked that. I've got a meeting with them tomorrow. So unfortunately, that information isn't to hand at the moment, but I can go back to you later on if that will be helpful. I've got a meeting with them tomorrow where we will be discussing how things are progressing. It's just a shame that I haven't had that meeting before this one. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for the question, Mary. I've got no other hands up, so can I take you to the recommendations on page 115? Members are asked to approve the amended prudential indicators set out in Appendix A. Could have somebody who propose. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Dylan. Secondary. All in favour? See no objections. Thank you. Now move on to item 18. This is the provisional outturn for 2020-21. So I'm not quite sure whether it's Ken or Helen that's dealing with this one.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to talk to it.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been an exceptional year, and the purpose of this paper is to update members on our financial performance and also project towards the end of the financial year. What I'd like to do is just touch on what our budget is And members will recall that in December 2019, we approved a net revenue budget of 35.9 million. And that was a marginal, it's an increase of 700,000 year on year. In addition, we approved a capital budget of £4.1 million. And as Graham has just alluded to, that's been quite a challenge for us this year. It's been absolutely exceptional, extremely challenging, and the issues that we've faced have been unprecedented. We've spoken earlier about the number of initiatives that we've experienced in terms of recruitment of personnel, and also we've had issues with the progression of a number of capital schemes. Worth noting that the posts in the budget are actually remain critical to the service and will be filled as soon as we can achieve this safely. That's not only in terms of the recruitment, it's also about bringing them in through medicals and also making sure that once they've passed all of those, that we can actually induct them into our service safely. During the year, we've not only experienced savings from vacancies and also reduced capital programme, but also travel restrictions. These are travel restrictions imposed by the government and the work from home. So what we've also seen is there's been a reduction in our travel costs and also some reductions in our utility costs as well. That said, there's also been some pressures, and those pressures arise from things like variable pay costs. Because although we've taken quite stringent measures in terms of protecting our staff, we have actually, as part of those measures, we require staff who were clinically vulnerable to remain at home. Therefore, we had some additional variable pay costs. It's also been necessary to purchase some essential ICT equipment and licenses, and also additional PPE. COVID-19 aside, there have also been some budget pressures that I need to make you aware of. They arise primarily from a pay award for local government staff or staff on local government terms and conditions. As you'll recall from part of our budget setting, there was that we forecast that their pay award would be 2%, and actually under the nationally agreed pay award, it was 2.75. In addition to that, we've had a number of ICT developments and also a large rates increase for one of our buildings, which was refurbished about 5 years ago, and the Valuation Office has subsequently issued an updated valuation, and that actually goes back over those 5 years. As a consequence of these, it's been necessary to realign the budget between the budget headings, and it's outlined in the report. And when we agreed the report in December 2019, we actually allocated the expenditure across the main budget headings, whether it be property, whether it be pay. So notwithstanding that, it's now necessary because of the action that we've had to take to realign the budget. As part of the challenges that we've faced, it's important that we've developed a new strategy, and that's been to carefully manage expenditure, and where there are underspends is to identify or ring fence them as reserves to support the management of future cost pressures. And we've touched on a few of those already this morning in terms of our improvement and wellbeing plan. We know that there's likely to be additional work arising from the Grenfell tragedy. There's also likely to be additional work arising from implementing an environmental strategy. That would include everything from a complete rewire of one of our buildings, replacement of boilers, perhaps a replacement of a roof, right through to the purchase of new LED bulbs. I think the one area that we've really struggled with this year, it's been the capital programme, and it's been extremely challenging, because what we've had to do is take a number of the schemes and defer them into next year. And that's been absolutely necessary to ensure that the COVID arrangements that we've put in place across our estate have been maintained. It's always a very difficult balance, because what you have to do is you have to carefully manage the risk of not doing the work against the risk of the health and safety and wellbeing of our staff if the work goes ahead. So at every time we make that decision, that risk assessment is undertaken. So essentially, a number of key messages for you. Challenging year in terms of that complexity, but the costs are being really carefully managed. So all of the additional costs that we've experienced, they are captured and recorded, monitored, and really carefully managed. Paying capital and financing underspends will be used initially to address cost pressures, and I've outlined some of those. And there, where there is still a surplus, we will actually ring fence that for future projects. Those capital schemes that have been deferred, What we will actually do is reschedule them for next year, but in each and every case, we'll assess them to make sure that the scheme remains viable. So the complexity of COVID, the uncertainty in the future, we don't know necessarily that some of our buildings won't be used differently. And what's important is that whatever work we do, it actually sits alongside and aligns to our longer term strategy. So some headline messages for members in terms of the current financial position and performance. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any questions from members? No. Well, can I take you to the recommendations that are on page 122? Note the draft revenue and capital outturn positions as detailed within the report and approve the budget realignment request. Can I have a proposer and seconder, please? Thank you. Owen? Somebody seconded? Okay, thank you, Gethin. All in favour? Thank you. Now we move on to item 19, the medium-term financial strategy 2021-24 and budget 21-22.
Thank you, Chair. If I can take this as well.
Yes.
This is the third and final financial paper on the agenda today, and it's clearly been quite a marathon. A number of the issues that we've discussed are common to all of the 3 financial years. And as you've just outlined, this is it's the time of year that we actually sort of set out our position for the future years. And the medium-term financial strategy does work from April 2021 through to March 2024. In addition to that, it's important that we actually have that first cut of the budget for 2021-2022. And that's really important so that we can actually start the dialogue with our constituent local authorities in terms of what their levy is going to be for next year. So that's actually clearly quite important as part of their own budget preparation work. It's important also that this report is considered in conjunction with item 9, which is the improvement and wellbeing plan. So it's really ensuring that we allow not only our organisational objectives, but align that with the financial consequences of those as well. I can't reiterate enough. I met with the directors of finance a couple of weeks ago, and we were just discussing that the difficulties faced this year in terms of the uncertainty around COVID-19. We don't know what the next year will look like. We certainly also don't know what the economic impact of COVID-19 will be across the region. And we also don't know what the government's spending review is going to produce. So as members will be aware, HM Treasury announced in the summer that it would undertake its comprehensive spending review, and that's currently in progress. So an awful lot of work is going on in parallel. So as much as we're setting the budget, so too are the local authorities, so too is the Welsh Government, so too is Treasury. So it's intended that the comprehensive spending review will be published towards the end of November, which will then provide further clarity to the Welsh Government, which will then be cascaded out. So it's a very uncertain time, but it's important really that we deal with that uncertainty. So I think the first thing to make you aware of is that the underlying assumptions in development of both the medium-term financial strategy and that of the budget for next year is that the current service delivery model will continue. And really that's important because over 72% of our spend is on pay. And as you'll see from the report, a significant proportion of that sits with our operational teams as well. So current service delivery model will continue, but that's only part of the picture, because it's then what do we anticipate in terms of activity, and what does that mean in terms of our staffing. So we don't know whether we'll have spate conditions. So in terms of the budget setting and the planning assumptions, we have planned to fully recruit up to established post all the vacancies. So the working assumption is that we will have staff in post. And also the other working assumption is that our activity levels will be along normal levels. So clearly any deviation from that immediately sort of impacts on the budget. But they're a reasonable working assumption, and it's reasonable to work on that basis. As pay costs do remain our single largest element, I'd like to reaffirm some of the key assumptions that we've used in developing that budget. Some of the assumptions, but also some of the risks and some of the uncertainties that we're facing. So just to reaffirm, the working assumption is that we will recruit to all of the posts that we've got in our establishment. We do have those vacancies currently, and we are working to look at those. You'll note from the report that over 87% of our costs relate to service delivery activity, whether that be our operational response, but also our protection and prevention work. And I think that's really, really important to recognise that the work that our prevention and protection teams do as well, because that very much is keeping the public of North Wales safe. As part of our planning, we've assumed a 2% year-on-year pay award. And certainly when I met with the directors of finance, that was clearly one of the issues that we discussed. They are determined nationally. They haven't yet been determined. And actually that is a degree of uncertainty for us. The 2% that we're using is common with other fire and rescue authorities as well. We're also assuming that the pension contribution rates for the firefighters remain unchanged. Now, clearly, we have a number of pension issues that we're going to have to deal with in the future, but the working assumption is that for 2021-22, that those rates will remain the same, and that any budget pressures that do hit will hit after that period. Notably as well, we do receive funding of £1.1 million from the Welsh Government, and that relates to the previous valuation where the employer contribution rates increased. Now, the working assumption again is that grant funding will continue, but that yet hasn't been confirmed. In addition to that, there are also additional pressures in respect to the local government pension scheme. And every valuation, they look at effectively what the current employer contribution rate is, and they give us the option of making one-off payments to meet any shortfall. So for 2021-22, it is there'll be an additional cost pressure of £0.3 million. What I'd like to do, and these are articulated in the report, but I'd like to draw members' attention to a number of other items. Some of them are risks, some of them are uncertainties. It's the complexity that we're dealing with. So we've touched on the Grenfell tragedy, and currently there is an awful lot of work coming out of the inquiry in terms of building safety and protection work. So any changes to that activity are not yet known by us. It is likely that the Fire and Rescue Service will have a role of sorts, but we just don't understand what that might be. That might well be training, it might be additional work, and indeed who would carry out that work. Also, we don't know at this stage whether a change of role will also come with additional funding. So therefore, at this stage, nothing, no financial assessments have been worked up because we're simply not in a position to do that, but we are flagging it as an uncertainty. You also know from your own constituent authorities that most areas across North Wales have now declared an environmental emergency. And our planning focus for this year will be on developing an environmental strategy. And that's aimed at achieving the ministerial aspirational target of a public sector carbon neutral by 2030. It's not to say that we're not doing anything at this stage, and we do take our carbon consumption into account at every business decision that we make. So to give you a couple of working examples, when our flexi duty officers, they're the officers that attend incidents, when their cars are coming up for renewal, historically we've used lease cars that were diesel, but every time they come up for renewal now, we're replacing those with hybrid vehicles. So no change to the way that we do things, but actually doing it in a more carbon friendly approach. Similarly, a lot of our building work is focused on replacing old boilers, electrical light fittings and rewires. And I'm sure that you will appreciate it's really quite a complex area. And so again, we haven't included any additional costs because at this stage it's not clear what additional work we will do. So two sides to that. When we do something now, we do always consider an environmental impact, and those any marginal additional costs are absorbed into the work that we undertake. We've spoken today at length really about the capital programme and also the impact on treasury management. And actually then that feeds through into the budget as well. So effectively, if you have a capital scheme and you have to borrow against it, at some point, you have to make a charge to revenue. That charge is the cost of borrowing, which clearly is very low at the moment, but it's also the cost of using that asset. So currently it's about 8% of net expenditure, and it's an area that we really keep that focus on, because a decision today is something that you need to maintain that focus on over the duration of the asset. And as you will appreciate, a very large scale scheme on a building will be something that lasts for 25, 30, 40 years. So very much making decisions today that will impact on future generations. So it's very much about making those sustainable. The capital plan for 2021 is estimated to be just very marginally higher than £3 million. The largest element of that relates to investment in new fire appliances, but it also includes about £900,000 for building works. And that is an area that those further checks will be undertaken before we can progress, to ensure that they don't compromise any COVID restrictions, and indeed don't, the long-term use of the building has been properly considered. Equally, with respect of our fire appliances, they are sourced from Europe. So again, we'll just have to be mindful of the Brexit impact in that. Brexit impact could be anything from additional tariffs, it might well be exchange rate issues, or indeed it could well be supply issues. So certainly our fleet department is working very closely with not only our suppliers, but other organisations as well, just to ensure that we maintain that supply chain. So in overall terms, the budget proposal is an increase of just over £1 million, and that's an increase to £37.07 million. That's an increase of just over 3%. Main element of that is payroll, but it also identifies some other cost pressures as well. I would like to confirm that I've met, albeit virtually, with the Directors of Finance of your own authorities and set out our approach. Difficult time for everybody at this moment, but they did provide assurance to me that they were experiencing those similar uncertainties, especially in respect of pay, and that they were comfortable with the approach set out in our paper. And you'll note from Appendix 4 of the report that we've actually set out the contribution required from each of our constituent local authorities. And I'm happy to take any queries in respect to the budget.
Thank you, Helen. I'm sure we all recognise the difficulty of budget setting at the moment, but I think you've made a very realistic attempt. I've got questions from Gethin Williams first, please.
Oh, thanks, Jay, and thanks, Helen, again for the report. I think you alluded to last the Appendix 4, the constituent local authority contributions. How are the increases allocated? It doesn't appear consistent on the tabling.
I think that's an excellent question. The contribution from each local authority is based on a population estimate. That population estimate is used consistently across all of the local authorities, and it's produced by the Welsh Government. So those figures are provided to us, and that's how it's calculated. So that work is done on our behalf by Comic Council.
Yeah, happy with the response, Gethin?
I'm not sure. Could I just give an example? The two councils, Gwyned's increase, although has slightly smaller population than Wrexham, for instance. is over double the increase. That's what I meant with by being consistent. I don't quite. Is it me who's missing something? I apologise if I do.
I think the difficulty was experienced last year because I think the mid-year estimates did change, and I think Wrexham was one of the authorities where they did change. But outside of the meeting, I'm really happy that prior to communicating these, we'll double check those figures and actually provide that coherent response in terms of why the increase has occurred.
Chairman, could I say something?
Yeah, yes, indeed, Ken.
The population calculation for the current year takes into account an adjustment made related to Wrexham because of the impact of the new prison. So it's not a straightforward calculation as would be normal, where everybody's percentage increase would be relative. So you'd have same statistical change. It's a consequence of a one-off situation that cropped up at the time. It may happen again. You never know.
Okay,
be right.
Thank you for that clarification, Ken.
I also make a few other comments.
Yes.
I deliberately waited to allow members to see the 5 or so reports that they've considered today. Some go through different channels in normal times. In the finance world, you don't really like times when there's change. But I believe that it's demonstrated that the staff that Helen, with the team that she has to work with, both within the service and working for the service, has proved extremely helpful to members in a difficult year, and it's been experienced like nobody. You've got long-term counsellors here, long-term service by officers. It's all quite a unique situation, even allowing for Black Friday many years ago and the Icelandic bank issue, which spring to mind. Helen has managed the in-house team extremely well, cooperated and done joint working with Conway Council, which Graham and Keith, I'm sure, would agree with, and has liaised extremely well with Audit Wales to manage improved outputs and outcomes, and producing clear information for members to make decisions based on that information. And I think you can be assured that the same level of management and cooperation will continue in the future. She's done a really good job. Everybody who works with her has done a good job as well.
Thank you, Ken. I think members will have gathered this morning, in actual fact, how excellent our staff have been in preparing these reports, but I appreciate and acknowledge your acknowledgement of the fact. Colin, you've got your hand up. Did you want to bring something in specific before I ask other members?
If I may, Chair, I think the most important point in Helen's presentation was the budget is based on the current operating model. And I think that's something you probably need to bring into the recommendation, because if the authority believes the operating model is fit for purpose and can't be reduced further without creating risk, then the budget has to flow. And I think, Helen, that's what you're saying. There aren't savings of any scale to be found, and that's the best defence for an increase for the constituent authorities when it's presented to them. Because, of course, today you're being asked to approve the draft budget for planning and for consultation before being finalised at a later date. That important model is what the authorities need to understand. We couldn't reduce the requirement without creating a degree of risk which isn't palatable for the authority. We're all basing across the region pay assumptions on 2%. We can't guarantee that will be the case, but given the financial situation facing governments, I'd be surprised if they don't drop the expectations on pay from the levels that we've seen this year back to something like 2% for next year. And finally, just the precise dates for the budget. So the Chancellor's statement is still due on the 25th of this month. It's been confirmed it will only be a one-year spending review, so that creates an impossible position of forward planning for the devolved governments too. So Welsh Government will only set a one-year budget, and that will be on Monday the 23rd of December. And we'll have the local government budget the next day. So we'll know what situation we're all in, aligned to this draft budget as we come out of Christmas into the new year. I hope that helps for Simon and Helen. I think that point about the operating model is critical, so people know what assumptions we're basing the budget on. Thank you.
Can I, just in terms of the recommendations which are on page 127, in terms of part 2, would you consider at the end there and future uncertainties added to item 2, so that planning process and future uncertainties, would that cover your concern, Colin?
I think, Chair, I'm just thinking aloud. I just think it's worth weaving in, perhaps on number 1, that those budgets are based on the existing operating model, because that is the explanation for the figures, isn't it? If that's okay.
Okay, fine. Have you noted that, Alwyn, please? Thank you.
Yes, I have. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a question now from Mary.
Diolch yn fawr, Ms Cadeirydd.
Thank you, Chair. I've tried looking in the information, but perhaps I've missed it. I'm also worried about the situation. The lower part of the fire authority, the lower tier, the chief officers, has this been factored in that perhaps that this needs to be improved, or are we going to leave this for another year yet?
I'm terribly sorry. I didn't quite understand that. Sorry. I wonder if you could repeat that.
I'll do it in my foreign language. I am concerned about the strength of our top tier. I have been for a while now. I'm just wondering whether we've put anything in so that we could look at that very seriously and increase or support our top tier a bit further. Diolch yn fawr.
Can I bring the chief to answer that, perhaps?
Yes, Chair. I'm grateful that Councillor Mayer was able to clarify his initial comment when he said he was concerned about the top tier. I wondered what we'd done wrong, but clearly the principal management team, or the senior team in the organisation, as we've already said today, is going to lose one of its members in January. Whenever there's a movement in the team, it's imperative that we review the current provision and bring forward any recommendations that we feel are necessary to improve and strengthen that. I think it's fair to say that improving and certainly increasing the numbers in your principal management team is never a popular thing. It doesn't go down well with almost anybody, but we, following Kevin's notice of retirement, we've got that position under review at the moment, Mayrick, and we'll be discussing the outcomes of that. So the work's not finished yet. We'll be discussing the outcomes of that in due course.
Okay.
Diolch yn fawr, Chief. Dwi'n meddwl bod hwnna yn bwysig.
Thank you very much, Chief. I think that is very important. You are part of the important workforce. Thank you very much.
Did you have another issue, Chief, you wanted to raise? Or was it?
I did, if I may, Chair. I appreciate discussions moved on somewhat a little bit, but I did want to make some comment in support of Colin's statement about the operational model. Just to remind members that we reviewed the what we call standards of fire cover. They were reviewed in 2015, and an operating model was introduced then. It's probably, through experience, it's probably a little bit too early to start talking about another full-scale review of fire cover, particularly given that we're almost certainly going to have to review our whole provision in both the post-COVID, post-Grenville environment. We don't know what the new normal is going to look like, either society or in organisations. There is still talk, and I've briefed members on this on many occasions, about broadening the role of firefighters. That's obviously something that will have to be done at a national level. That work hasn't progressed at all since we last spoke about that, but it's still very much on the horizon. And of course, there's assembly elections next year. Sorry, are they next year or the year after? Next year. I'm losing track of where I am. The Assembly will then need to bring forward a new national framework when we get the new Senedd, and therefore there's a chance then that the expectations on fire and rescue services will change, and then we'll need to address those expectations. And some of that addressing the expectation may be through a change to the operational model. So really, just to support Colin's point, I don't think it's the time to start looking at the operational model just at this point, and as a consequence, we're going to have to fund the operational model that we've currently got. There really is no alternative.
Okay. Can I ask Colin, in the light of that response, whether you still want to maintain that as an additional part to the recommendations?
Yes, please, Chair, because we are telling the constituent authorities this budget is based on the model that they've supported. That's the point I was making. Otherwise, it sometimes just looks at figures. I think people need to understand the position of risk if we were under pressure to reduce that budget further.
Okay, thank you. Dylan Rees.
Thank you, Chair. I think that the Chief has just been looking into his crystal ball, because he's more or less answered the question that I was about to ask, because I was going to refer to, under the summary of planning assumptions and risks at Appendix 1, where it says the staffing budgets have been formulated on existing service delivery models and established staffing levels. And that comes back to the point that the clerk was making about that the budget is based on the current operating model, which we can't reduce. And my concern was whether or not we would have to actually increase the current model rather than reduce it, bearing in mind the monitoring note that has come out that members would have seen this week, whereby the FBU nationally are calling for increased fire cover, saying that cuts have left the UK's fire services too stretched, and are obviously seeking to increase fire cover across authorities rather than reduce it. But I take a note of what the Chief has said, that we did review it in 2015, and that now isn't the time to do an assessment yet, but it is something that we will have to bear in mind in the not too distant future, and it could impact upon the operating model. But thank you for the Chief's answer, which has reassured me.
Thank you for that, Dylan. Right, I've got no more raised hands then, so can we go to the recommendations with the addition that Colin has outlined in terms of the operational model? Could I have somebody to propose them, please? Somebody put the hand up, have they? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Seconded, thank you. All in favour? Thank you. And can I thank Helen and all the officers for those reports that we've just considered. Was a considerable amount of detail and information there, so thank you very much. Now move on to item 20, Principal Officers Pay Award, and Colin's going to deal with this. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Briefly, so this covers the 2 senior pay awards. One is resolved and one isn't. Although you're asked to approve both, you are obligated to pay them because, of course, they're contractual responsibilities for national negotiation machinery. So what I've suggested at recommendation 4 is the one that is pending. When it is settled at national level, you've already given approval for it to be implemented straight away, because that would be an obligation anyway, rather than delay it and bring it back to a future Fire Authority meeting. So it's a fairly straightforward report, Chair.
Thank you. Any members got their hand up? No. Well, then, can I take you to the recommendations on page 140 and just item 4, that you agree to the payment of the pending award for the Chief Fire Officer and Assistant Chief Fire Officers once the National NJC negotiations are concluded. Do we have somebody propose it? Thank you. Michael, seconded. Thank you, Anne. All in favour? Thank you. I'll go to the next item, which is members' remuneration. Colin, you're going to take this one for us?
Yes, thanks, Chair. You'll have had reported in your own constituent authorities the outcome of the Remuneration Panel's annual report. So this is the one specifically with the Fire Authority. There's a minor uprating of the allowances, which again we're obligated to implement. Beyond that, the scheme is unchanged from the report. So again, a fairly routine recommendation for you.
Thank you. I see no members with raised hands. I'm always grateful that there's an independent body actually doing this for members. So can I have, excuse me, the recommendations are on page 143. Can I have somebody that's actually proposed it, that we note the IRPW's recommendations?
Move, Chair.
Thank you. Seconded? All in favour? Thank you. Now move on to item 22, appointment of a Fire and Rescue Authority member to serve on the Standards Committee. And you'll be aware of the background of this, that our previous member was the Deputy Chair, Dylan Rees, and obviously that precludes him from actually sitting on the Standards Committee. So we need a member. So could I have a nomination, please?
And Chair, it's not because Councillor Rees has done anything wrong. It's just to create a separation of roles. It's just a bit of tidying up of the Constitution, but thank you to Dylan for his service to the committee.
Can I have a nomination then? Well, in the absence of anybody putting their hand up, I'd like to propose Michael Dixon to the role. I think members will be well aware, particularly on the executive, of the conscientiousness of Michael, and I think he would be an able member for the Standards Committee. So,
seconded, Chair. Fully agree.
Good enough.
Okay, we've had the seconder. Any other nominations? No.
And Chair,
yes.
Chair, if I might, I think it is fair to point out that you are aware that he would be amenable to the nomination as well.
Well, being a good chair, I have actually sought that out in advance.
I'm happy to confirm it now as well, if that helps, but thank you, Gareth.
Okay, all in favour? Thank you.
Oh, thank you all very much.
Thank you, Michael. Well, that comes to the end of part one of the meeting. Can I thank again all the contributors and authors to the reports that we received today. It's been a long agenda, but I think that we've dealt with every item fairly and given everybody due opportunity. So can I thank everybody? And at that point, we're going to move it. Somebody actually proposed that we move into part two, and those that aren't eligible, if they would kindly leave the meeting. So somebody proposed we move into part two.
Eric and Cunning.
Mairead proposes.
Okay, thank you.